There's something almost eerie about it. You're in a room, someone's speaking, maybe even smiling, and everyone else is nodding along. Everything sounds right. The tone, the phrasing, the message. But something inside you clenches. Not out of fear, not out of judgment. Just this still, subtle knowing. They're not being real. And you can't even explain how you know. It's not in what they said, it's in what they didn't say. It's not their face, it's their energy.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
The vibe is off. The mask is smooth, polished even, but underneath, you feel the tension. You feel the split, and you just know they're not telling the whole truth. Welcome to the strange, still world of spiritual clarity. The kind Alan Watts often danced around with words, weaving metaphysical insight with psychological truth. Because when you're truly awake, not in the buzzwordy, trend-driven sense, but actually present, you don't just perceive the world differently. You perceive people differently, instantly, intuitively, and yes, sometimes uncomfortably. It's not magic. It's not mind reading. It's not some esoteric superpower handed out after years of yoga or plant medicine ceremonies. No, Watts would tell you it's much simpler than that. You see deception clearly because you've stopped lying to yourself. That's it. That's the punchline. Because once you've done the deep, uncomfortable, unfiltered work of turning inward, really turning inward and dismantling your own illusions, something miraculous happens. You begin to recognize those same illusions outside of you. Instantly, without effort. Like spotting a typo in a sentence you've read 1,000 times. It's not about suspicion. It's not about being cynical. It's not even about calling people out. It's about discernment, that quiet internal resonance that says, this doesn't match. The words say one thing, but the energy says something else entirely. You've probably felt this before. Someone compliments you, but their smile doesn't reach their eyes. Someone says they're fine, but you can feel the storm behind their voice. Someone claims to be enlightened, spiritual, pure, but something in you tightens. Not because you're judging them, but because truth has a tone. And so does ego. And when you've sat with your own ego long enough, watched it squirm, dress itself up, play roles, build castles made of self-importance, you stop being fooled by other people's. You see the cracks instantly, not with your eyes, but with your being. Watts used to say that children perceive the world more accurately than adults. Not because they're more intelligent, but because they haven't yet layered their perception with conditioning, fear, and identity. A child sees what is, not what's supposed to be. And spiritual awakening, in its purest form, is a return to that direct seeing, but with adult awareness. You're not naive, you're clear. You've cleared the fog off the mirror, and now the reflection you're seeing in others. It's raw, honest, often painful, but never fake. And the irony, the more awake you become, the more gentle you are with deception, because you understand it. You remember what it was like to lie to yourself, to perform, to armor up, wear the mask, hold back the truth. Not because you were evil, but because you were scared. Fear is the root of deception, and awakening doesn't make you superior. It just gives you sight, and from that sight comes compassion. You don't hate the mask wearers. You see them, you feel them, and yes, you can spot them in seconds. The words, the posture, the subtle twitch and energy. You're not analyzing, you're resonating. You're reading something deeper than surface, something energetic. This is why awakened people can sit in a room full of motivational speakers, self-help gurus, or spiritual influencers and feel something's off even when everything looks right. Because truth has a texture, and so does performance. One feels grounded, soft, spacious. The other feels tight, polished, buzzed with tension. One invites presence. The other demands attention. One flows like water. The other pushes like wind. And you don't need to study body language to know this. You just need to stop pretending in yourself. Because the more honest you are inwardly, the more painfully obvious dishonesty becomes outwardly. Let's talk about spiritual circles for a moment, because this is where the illusion gets thick. The performative enlightenment. The spiritual ego dressed in white linen and vague metaphors. The awakened voice that speaks only in calm tones, quoting Rumi while subtly positioning itself as superior to all the unawakened masses. Watts would smile at that, probably sip his whiskey and raise a knowing eyebrow. Because the spiritual mask is still a mask, and just because it wears mala beads and speaks about oneness doesn't mean it's not hiding. The truly awake, they don't need to look enlightened. They don't need to say it. You just feel it. They don't project purity, they embody humility. They don't need to be right, they're curious about what's real. They don't demand your trust, they create space for truth to emerge.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
And when someone's faking it, you feel that too. Not as a judgment, not as moral superiority, but as incongruence. Like music slightly out of tune. You can still listen, but something in your body cringes. Because presence doesn't lie. And once you live in presence, really live there, you stop being fooled by those who only talk about it. This awareness extends beyond people. It moves into systems, institutions, media, ideologies. You start to see how entire collectives buy into illusions. You notice the quiet manipulation in advertising, the emotional bait in politics, the performance built into religious hierarchy. You start to see how collective deception works, how society conditions us to trade authenticity for approval. And again, you don't become angry. You just see it clearly. Without the fog, without the filters, you realize the whole system is made of stories. And those stories, they only have power if you believe them. Watts would say that awakening is like removing earplugs you didn't know you were wearing. Suddenly, the subtle becomes obvious. The energetic becomes tangible. And deception, whether it's personal, systemic, or spiritual, stands out like a sharp note in an otherwise quiet room. But this isn't about becoming suspicious. This isn't about hunting for lies. It's about no longer needing lies to feel safe. When you've sat in silence long enough to face your own shadows, you stop being afraid of others. When you've stopped performing, you stop demanding others perform for you. You start craving truth more than comfort. And that truth, it rarely arrives with a spotlight. It's usually quiet, disarming, simple. It doesn't sell well. It doesn't post well. It doesn't brand well. But it resonates. It drops into your chest like a stone into still water. You feel it. And once you've felt it enough times, you learn to trust that feeling. You stop second-guessing it. You stop explaining it away. Because you know the same way you know when someone's in love or when someone's pretending. It's energetic. And no amount of charm, intellect, or poetic language can cover it up. So what does this mean for you? It means the more honest you become with yourself, the more truth you'll naturally attract and the more illusion you'll effortlessly repel. It means you don't need to try to spot deception. You just need to be clear within yourself. Because clarity is contagious. It shines light on everything it touches. So let that be your path, not to become a human lie detector, but to become so honest, so present, so grounded in your own being that anything false simply doesn't stick. It slips right off you like water off clean glass. And when you do encounter deception, smile. Not because it's right, but because you understand. Everyone's wearing masks they forgot they put on. But you're free. And that's how spiritually awake people see through it all, not with judgment, but with clarity. Not because they know more, but because they need less. And not because they're better, but because they've stopped pretending. And that's the real superpower. Stillness, clarity, presence, no filter needed. Because if you're still here, still reading, still feeling the rhythm of this, then some part of you already knows exactly what we're talking about. You felt it, maybe even lived it. That subtle, quiet click in your gut when someone's words don't match their energy. When a smile feels like a screen. When an entire conversation sounds perfectly normal, but something underneath it is howling. This isn't true. And you can't always explain it. You can't write a thesis on it. You don't always have receipts, but you feel it in your bones. That's what Alan Watts meant when he said that awakening doesn't give you new powers, it reveals the ones you've had all along. Because here's the thing nobody tells you when you start walking a spiritual path. Awakening isn't about becoming more. It's about becoming less filtered, less reactive, less attached to illusion. And when you strip away the noise, you start to see. You see people. You see energy. You see systems. You see motives. But most of all, you see through the performance, through the projection, through the beautiful, fragile, elaborate facades people build just to feel safe in a world that demands so much pretending. And this isn't about superiority at all. If anything, it's the opposite. Because the moment you start seeing clearly, you stop needing to label everything as good or bad. You stop pointing fingers. You stop trying to fix or expose or control. Instead, you understand. You understand that deception is usually not malicious. It's survival. It's a person clinging to a version of themselves they were told was lovable. It's someone saying what they think they're supposed to say, because they don't believe the truth will be accepted. And how do you know this? Because you did it too. You told yourself stories to avoid pain. You crafted versions of yourself to get approval. You smiled when you were falling apart. You wore the mask and called it your face. And when you finally got tired of performing for your own reflection, when you finally sat down, got still, and started peeling back the layers, you began to hear a deeper frequency. Your frequency. And once you're tuned into that, you can't unhear it. You can't go back to pretending that surface-level talk feels satisfying. You can't fake laugh through spiritual platitudes. You can't sit in a room full of performance and call it authenticity. Because now, you can feel the difference. And let me tell you, when you can feel it, the whole world shifts. People start sounding different. Interactions become clearer. You begin to sense who's aligned with truth and who's just reciting it. You notice the tremble behind the smile, the tiny flicker of fear in someone's eyes when they tried to sound strong. You notice what isn't said, because absence is loud when you're paying attention. And you don't have to analyze it. You don't have to dissect it. You just know. In the same way you know when someone is lying about loving you, not because of what they said, but because of how it felt when they said it. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. The more awake you are, the less you're seduced by performance, even your own. You start noticing the places where you still armor up, where you still wear the spiritual person mask, where you still quote Watts or Ram Dass or Lao Tzu when you're afraid to speak from your own knowing. You catch yourself. You soften. You stop performing spirituality and start living it, which, funnily enough, looks a lot less glamorous than most people think. It's quiet, simple, grounded. It's not robes and chanting and curated wisdom drops. It's telling the truth in a hard conversation. It's noticing when your ego is grasping for attention. It's admitting when you don't know. It's choosing presence over performance, even when performance would be easier. It's holding compassion for the parts of you that still want to be liked and not shaming them, but understanding them. Because again, the awakened don't become robotic or detached. They become deeply human. They cry more, not less. They feel more, not less. They care more, not less. But they no longer let ego steer the ship. And that's the key. That's how you spot deception, not because you're scanning the room for liars, but because you aren't lying to yourself anymore. Your inner mirror is clean, so every smudge outside is visible, and you don't judge it. You just notice. You might meet someone who talks about peace and light and forgiveness, but you feel their words are layered with unspoken resentment. You might hear someone preaching about detachment while clinging to their image like a lifeline. You might listen to a self-proclaimed teacher talk about surrender while gripping their followers with fear. And again, you don't have to say a word. You don't need to expose them. You don't need to declare yourself as someone who sees through it all. You just hold space. You stay clear. You choose not to feed the illusion, because clarity doesn't need to fight confusion. It just is. And sometimes, your presence alone is enough to disarm deception. That's the other part people forget. When you're truly awake, genuinely clear, rooted, and unshaken, you become a mirror. People start revealing themselves without realizing it. Not because you interrogate them, but because your energy is a kind of invitation. You don't have to perform here. You can be real. And sometimes, they will. They'll drop the act. The voice will change. The body will relax. The facade will melt. And what's left is them. The real them. The soft, scared, sacred self behind the mask. And you'll recognize it instantly. Because that's what awakening does. It teaches you to recognize truth. Not the polished kind. Not the stage-lit kind. But the naked kind. The silent kind. The kind that doesn't need to be explained. Because it's felt. Alan Watts once said, "You don't look out there for God, something in the sky, you look in you." The same is true for truth. You don't go out hunting it in others. You strip away everything in yourself that blocks it. And what's left is something so crystal clear, so utterly resonant, that deception becomes obvious, not in a harsh, dramatic way, but like light showing dust in a beam. It's just visible, and that doesn't make you special. It makes you present. So here's the takeaway, if there is one. Don't chase awakening to see through people. Let awakening show you where you're still pretending. Because the more honest you become with yourself, the more the world starts to reflect that honesty. Even the ones who lie. Even the ones who manipulate. Even the ones who preach peace while fuming on the inside. They're not evil. They're not broken. They're just afraid. Afraid they're not enough. Afraid the truth of who they are is unlovable. Afraid that if they took off the mask, no one would stay. And you see it. You feel it. You know it without needing to call it out. Because once you've stood in front of your own nakedness, your unvarnished, uncurated, unscripted self, you develop this almost supernatural sensitivity to energy. You can feel truth walk into a room like a shift in air pressure. You can tell when someone is rooted and when someone is floating in their own self-image. You can tell when a healer is still deeply wounded but performing strength. You can hear the difference between humility and humble bragging. It's not about reading between the lines, it's about hearing what was never said in the first place. Where do I say what sounds good instead of what's real? Where am I using spirituality as armor instead of truth? Where am I hiding behind enlightened language because I'm afraid to just be? When you start answering those questions honestly over and over again, something cracks open. And what spills out isn't certainty. It's freedom. Because you're no longer at war with your own humanity. You stop performing truth and start living it. You stop trying to sound wise and start becoming simple. And suddenly, the people still performing, you recognize them instantly. Not because you're on some pedestal of awareness, but because you've met that version of yourself. You remember what it feels like to cling to image. You remember the inner ache that comes with trying to be seen without showing who you really are. That ache is universal. And when you feel it in someone else, you don't shame it. You just let it be. Because here's the other thing awakening reveals. You don't need to convince people of the truth. You don't need to debate, expose, or argue your way into clarity. Truth doesn't need your defense. It just needs your embodiment. If someone is lost in their own illusion, you meet them where they are, not to save them, but to see them genuinely, quietly, without agenda. That's how real transformation happens. Not through confrontation, but through presence. You being you fully, clearly, authentically creates a kind of permission for others to do the same. If you made it all the way to the end, can't you're officially part of the small percentage of it either dissolves or runs away, and because people can sense before when they can't fool you and often from you. That scares them. Drop a comment below and tell me your thoughts, your ideas, or even what you'd like to see next. I read every single one of them, and your feedback genuinely shapes the direction of this channel. If you enjoyed the video, tap that like button. It tells YouTube this content is worth sharing. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next upload. We've got more exciting videos coming, and trust me, you'll want to be here for them. This channel is just getting started, and your support helps it grow faster than you realize. Thank you again for spending a part of your day here with me. Stay curious, stay motivated, and as always, take care of yourself. Until next time, I'll see you in the next video.